Hello everyone, we've come to the end of the course, RLCT 2016, Practicing Religion, can't believe it. And we've covered a lot of ground in this course, and I'm hoping that you've had time to reflect on some of the key themes that have been raised within the syllabus. So I started out in the very beginning looking at a topic I called the surprising seriousness of ritual and celebration. And of course, I don't know really what attitude you had coming in, but typically people in Ontario, in my experience, have a very negative view of religion and certainly of ritual. Even some religious people have a negative view of ritual. And so part of the idea of the course is to show the ways in which material practice of religion remains very important, and also how it expresses how people and groups of people live and understand their religious traditions. And so religious studies started out often in the past focusing on religious texts, and so having this field of study of material practice allows us to get at how just normal people live and experience and understand their religion. One of the key aspects of ritual is the embodied practice of religion, and so this photograph is just one example of somebody with beads, so beads or rosaries or malas. It's one example, and I had a student that worked in long-term care years ago, and she told me that even people with dementia can remember how to say the rosary, so it is such an embodied, deeply held practice, and I think it gets lost sometimes in the study of religion. And so I was using the work of Morgan he talks about the way that religion is lived in the grit and strain of life. So these are practices that are done on a daily basis, on a routine basis, and are deeply embodied. I thought this would be an appropriate image given the season that we're moving into. So here's an example where a person might think, what does making little ginger men have to do with religion? But of course, these baking traditions, generally passed down within families, often through the women of the family, are an intrinsic part of marking the calendar. And I think this points to the psychological impact of rituals and practices like this, which is that they structure time. They structure time often in the day, and they structure time in the year. And so we know what season we're in because we're eating certain foods. It's at a very, very basic level. And we discussed that in the course that many people, they participate in Halloween with no awareness that emerges from the liturgical calendar. Same with Pancake Tuesday, same with Mardi Gras, etc. So this is taken for granted, and actually that's a sign that it's functioning, is that it's taken for granted. If you're having to think too much about it, it's probably a kind of a museum piece. So Bocock talks about this, that we may think we live in these technological societies and we've moved beyond ritual, but in fact we all participate in them all the time. Also in the course we looked at rituals structuring time in terms of the lifetime of a person, and so the rites of passage and how they move the individual basically from cradle to grave and move us through these transition points in our lives. Other practices like pilgrimage are more unusual. They're not as common. They might come once in a lifetime or only a few times in a lifetime, and so they have a very specific significance. But these are also very common material practices of religion, regardless of the tradition, to go on a pilgrimage to a site that's believed to be particularly sacred. In this case, it's Hindu pilgrims walking up into the Himalayan mountains, which are considered to be a sacred area of India. Another topic we looked at was the idea of secular ritual, and particularly within the university setting. And once you start to really think about it, you notice there's all sorts of rituals related to university life. Again, I hadn't really thought about it that much until I developed this course of how many rituals there are, and the way that the term is structured, it's very, very specific every year. So for instance, we're moving into exam season, we all know what that means. So we all live within this kind of structured reality of the rituals of the university calendar. Amitai Etzioni is one of the theorists that we focused on in this course because he takes celebrations and holidays very seriously, and he's an advocate of recommitting to these kind of both the secular and the religious celebration of holidays. And he talks about the idea of the difference between rituals, tension management versus rituals of recommitment and maintenance. And so, for instance, a yearly anniversary celebration of a couple would be an example of a ritual that's meant to emphasize the bond between the couple and so they recommit to the relationship every year and so on. And also, of course, office Christmas parties as tension management at the end of the year. People can let off a bit of steam. And again, we see all the same characteristics we see in religious rituals as well. I've talked a lot about the idea of clothing. And so that idea that you buy, often in North American culture, people buy a special outfit for the office Christmas party. And so clothing always a measure that this is a kind of a special set-aside occasion. Okay, don't get me started on this, but as I said, I'm sure you have your own opinions about Disneyland, but it is interesting to look at the way in which Disneyland has co-opted a lot of the aspects of ritual and public ritual for capitalist reasons. The use of costuming, the use of procession, the use of floats, etc. And so all with this, supposed naivete about it all. So I think it's important that, well, I certainly want you to think about what happens when we lose traditional forms or community-based forms of ritual and public ritual. Certainly people that don't think about religion would say it makes no difference. But I want us to think a little more deeply about it because we know historically that these rituals and practices fulfill very important sociological and psychological needs for people. So those needs don't go away. So what fills in for that? And so I think you could argue, or I would argue, that these sorts of practices are a kind of simulacra. They're kind of a spectacle that moves in to try to replace those traditional modes. But as the work of Kevin Gotham shows us, it doesn't work. And what we find, for instance, in Mardi Gras is consumerism and taking over these companies, kind of renting floats and sort of taking over the traditional practices to the point where the Mardi Gras, he argues, is losing its meaning for the actual people that live there. And so the ritual is always meant to bring together the people of the city itself and reunite them and keep them tightly bound in a community. So if you have a bunch of tourists coming and just want to, flash and throw beads and etc., that's going to disrupt what's going on here. Now, in the case of Disneyland, you have this kind of set aside, kind of corralled area that has no relation to any kind of real community. People are coming from all over the place. So it's interesting to look at what is actually happening in the case of these rituals, and are they effective in the way that the traditional ones were. Certainly, I talked about the idea of indigenous ritual as a way of playing this just absolutely vital role in reinforcing and reinvigorating indigenous culture. But I'm not quite sure what Mickey and Minnie Mouse do for us. But anyway, you are free to argue with me about this on the exam. I'd actually really enjoy it. I know a lot of people really like Disneyland. I'm mystified by it, but if you have a good argument, I'm very happy to hear it. We also talked in the course about the idea of civic religion as being a potential substitute for religion. And this one is perhaps even more dangerous, in my opinion. So this relates back to the rise of nationalism in the 19th century. And so we can see this. I think Canadians aren't really that great at this, but in the United States, you can see it more clearly. There's a whole kind of calendar of these, of the Republic and the martyrs of the Republic and the marching and the bands and so on. And so in many, many ways, it has all the hallmarks of a religion. Now, the problem potentially is that we know historically hyper-nationalism almost inevitably leads to war. So is this a good substitute for people to put their sense of identity and cohesion only within the nation state? So that's a question also for you to think about. Is this substitute potentially a negative replacement for religion? I want to talk a little bit about the final exam, and there's no trick to this. You just need to study. You're responsible for all the readings that have been assigned and the lectures and any links that I've given out or videos. So the final exam will be posted to Blackboard Monday, November 29th at 9 a.m. and will be due Friday, December 10th at 5 p.m. I ask that you please write in full sentences, no point form. Also include your name and course code on the exam. And the exam is going to consist of short answer worth 5 and 10 marks each. So I've really spread it out over a number of topics. So what I'm aiming at here is to see that you've understood the key concepts of the course and that you can discuss them in a written form. So there's no trick here. You just need to do all the readings, and I recommend that you take notes. That's a good way of helping you to remember. And if you have any questions about the final exam, feel free to contact me. So in the short review, I'm just going to give you some direction around some of the main concepts that you'll be expected to discuss on the final exam. So we'll be beginning, as we did in the course, with the material drawn from the Suzanne Moore article regarding public expressions of grief after the death of celebrities like David Bowie. And so that article was used as a way to introduce you into the field and also to demonstrate the ways in which people continue to express things ritually and in public. Then on a related topic, that idea drawn from Bocock, the way that religion and ritual maintains itself even within industrial societies like England and Canada. And so why would that be the case? So Bocock's a sociologist, so he's very concerned with how ritual functions in groups sociologically. So you'll need to review that section. We'll move on to looking at other secular rituals, such as with a variety of examples, including university life and some of the ways that they function and why you think that they continue to be extremely popular. And we'll be moving on to the rites of passage and the samskaras. So you'll be expected to know that. Now, you did a whole assignment on this, so there shouldn't be any problem with a discussion of the reason that we find these rituals across culture. So you'll also be asked to talk about various forms of private material practice and why you think those maintain their popularity. We're going to be moving on to talking about the idea of enchantment. And so this is drawn from the work of Weber, who was concerned that with the rise of bureaucracy and technology and so on, that people would be reduced to, he referred to it as being in an iron cage, and so in this kind of banal, flat existence without any form of enchantment, which he believed came from religious spiritual belief. So I'm going to be asking you to discuss ways in which various new religions have attempted to re-enchant modernity through their material practice. So then you'll be moving on to looking at a variety of public rituals that we already did discuss in the earlier remarks. So just to end here, we're going to be looking at various forms of spectacle and public ritual that have moved into the space where often religious ritual used to be practiced. And so as we discussed, I'll be wanting you to talk about whether or not you think those are effective substitutes, what role do they play, compare and contrast, and then to discuss the importance of ceremony and ritual in the revival of Indigenous culture in North America. So if you have any questions or you're not sure about certain topics, please feel free to contact me, and we can discuss it either via email or on the phone.